I call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Are we good? Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Roll call. All directors are present. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Mr. Bartz, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, I would like to pull item 6D again tonight, which was the sphere discussion. It's not ready yet.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
My motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor of the motion to approve the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Public comment. Ms. Ward, do we have any public?
Yes, we have Cheryl Roden. Do you have a public comment?
Hi, I'll have some comments on item 5 after the staff report, if that in the consultant's report, if my questions aren't answered, and possibly 6B, unless that was the one you pulled. I couldn't hear that correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roden. All right, and we just have one visitor in the public. I can say it. It's my son, Gabriel Kuyava, and he's just here to watch for his political science class.
There'll be a test later. Guaranteed.
All right, community reports. Do we have anyone from CERT?
There are no community
No one.
regular report members here.
Nobody. All right. All right, so we will move on to number 3, consent items. Does anyone have any items they would like to pull? No? Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
I'll move it.
I'll
Consent
second.
items.
Okay, motion and a second. All in favor of the motion to approve the consent items?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And the motion passes. Number 4, we did not have any matters removed from consent, so we move on to number 5, presentation of draft community survey. Mr. Bartz.
Thank you, President Kujawa. Chris Collier with Rincon Strategies is with us tonight, and he wanted to give a presentation on the proposed draft community survey. And I believe looks like he's here on the line.
Hi, Chris, you're on mute.
Still. You took a nap?
It's going to be a short presentation.
Nope.
There,
we are. Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Hi there. Sorry about that. I guess after a day full of Zoom meetings, it decided to kick me off right as it's my time to talk. I'm going to leave my camera off, but share my screen just in case it's a bandwidth issue, and pull up the survey draft. And first talk a little bit about how we got here, and say thank you for the opportunity to get this far with this and talking to all of you at one point or another about how we developed the tool that we're going to use to go get good data for the district on this process. Up until the end of the year, we were kind of going back and forth on getting numbers from the financial consultants, and first week of January, I worked with Kim and got some round numbers that we can then use to test. And so this draft has been prepared with those numbers in mind. And our goal here is to basically learn a lot more about how people feel about the parks. So unless there are any questions about how we approached this, I'm going to go through why we picked the questions we picked, what we're trying to discern, and then ultimately ask for your approval to go into the field as soon as the next 48 hours Should take 4 to 5 days to collect data, depending on the responsiveness of the community and a number of things. It's just you never know until you're out there how long it takes. And then ideally, if I have preliminary top line results, I won't have full analysis back, but I understand there's a meeting next Wednesday, again, for the discussion on this issue, and I'll be able to at least be present and talk about what some of the top line findings are, and then come back to your board with the full discernment on everything that is being presented with all the view on the crosstabs and everything else once I have that data available in a few weeks.
All right, sounds great.
Okay, so you all see my screen? Do you need to make it bigger? Maybe a little bit?
Bigger, yeah.
Bigger.
And we do have a copy in front of us as well.
Right, and I know it was in the staff packet, so I'm going to make this as big as possible, and let's see how the one's got different screen sizes, right, in every room. So the idea is we would start running the survey in 2 days. Our goal is to collect 400 respondents from the community through a combination of digital and live telephonic interviews. Digital is primarily served via text message, where folks are given a unique link so they can't forward it to their friends. If you are a voter, you get a link because you have registered to vote, given your cell phone number, or it's commercially available in the data sets that we use. The telephone number, same thing. These are from the folks that are registering to vote and providing that information. Generally, we balance that. I don't want to say as we go, but the goal is to get as a robust survey as possible. It doesn't matter as much how we collect the data, whether it's the telephonic or the digital text message. It matters more that we get the right number of respondents in each of the demographic categories we wait for, age, gender, things like that. And so as we are looking at the community as a whole, we'll go and collect 400 sample and then go through our results. So with that, the warm-up question we asked twice, what is the most pressing issue in the community? We go through a list of issues that had been that come up as we discussed with each of the board members. This is where I came through in my early understanding of the situation. These are just things that people had in the body politic on their mind, and we wanted to hear where people are. We also leave in other categories so we can look at the responses in that. Kind of a warm-up issue, but kind of also to see where things fall in terms of services and parks and recreation specifically on there, to see what that deficit's like compared to some of the other issues going on in the community. Question 3. We ask a right track, wrong track question, to understand where, if people know community service district, what they think about how things are going. There's going to be a variety of opinions there. We try and distill that to just understand whether people are generally thinking things are okay or generally thinking things have issues. Next question, on a scale of 1 to 5, we look at the importance of the services. And this, I did see an email question about, I guess something that wasn't clear to me prior to earlier today was that there might be other water purveyors in the issue or in the district that aren't the community services district. In general, what I'm trying to compare here is water versus parks versus waste. It doesn't necessarily matter who or what service specifically is involved. I'm just trying to see in the basket of services that are offered where people's understanding of the district services are and what they think are important or not important. So that's why we compare for A, B, and C, just kind of broadly like that.
Mr. Collier.
Next question, I'm sorry, should be deleted. There should be one question 4, not question 4 and 5 on my draft. So we'll skip that.
Say that again, please.
Question 4 and question 5 are the same. There should be one. I got duplicated, and so I will delete that for the final run.
Well, they're different questions.
No.
Yeah, they are.
Yes, they are different questions. I'm sorry, I was reading that wrong. I'm doing this on laptop.
Yeah.
Yes, importance and rating are different. No, I did that for a reason. I'm sorry. End of the day. So the importance is understanding whether or not someone cares, and the service issue is more if there are any issues in the district's particular follow through. And there's a nuance to that. There is, it's something I posed for a discussion. If in my recommendation, we can have both, we can not have both. It's not material to the parks question. It's not going to drive the response to the ballot measure. But while we're in the field, I think in some of our interviews I talked about, it's good to see what people think about the service that's offered. So that's why this question's here. Get my notes.
Mr. Collier,
Yes.
would you prefer the questions at the end?
I'll take questions as we go so that we don't have to jump around with a scrolling screen. It's probably easier.
Okay, well, question number 5, since we're there. You're asking about how would you rate the service provided by your CSD? There's, pretty close to 1,200 people that are in our district that are not customers of ours. And so how are they going to be able to rate that? Without distinguishing whether they're Sheep Creek or CSD?
So what we would do there, I will add the question. We'll do 1 to 5, and then we'll have a response for I don't have this service in the district. So that way we can only look at the people who get that service, and then everyone else is just saying that they don't receive that service.
Because if
I'll
they
make sure
don't
that's
rate Sheep
clarified.
Creek and they rate us low, that would not be good.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Collier.
Now, it would be independent of the ratings, but part of the question. So I'll make that change.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
All right, we can go on to question number 6, right?
Yeah. Question 6, how often do you visit parks or community centers? Not necessarily the Phelan Community Park, but any park or community center. You want to figure out what people think in terms of whether or not they're using the Parks and Recreation services or not, and this is the qualifier for that. Question 7 is a little bit about the outreach that's been done to date. It's the first of 2 questions on this. CSD has explored plans to expand the Phelan Community Park, and then talking about either someone's well-informed, they're somewhat aware, they're aware but don't know much more, or they haven't heard of it. And this will really give you an idea of how much penetration the previous outreach has. It's been months since that, and at this point we'll want to know how much people have, how much that's faded. And we had some pretty good participation in that early on. And then how they've heard about it. Again, this is just looking at what channels were most effective. The community meetings, the website, the board meeting, local newspaper, and then a place for others, so we can kind of see how people are getting information. The next question, number 9, goes through the existing plan. As I worked with Kim to get the details on what is absolutely at this point still on the table for the without the pool, the park expansion plan. And what we wanted to do here was just look at each of the elements and determine how important they were to folks. And again, this data will be very valuable. And ultimately, we're trying to answer the question here, is this something the voters want and are willing to pay for? And so when we look at folks that are not, or that are willing to pay for it, is there something that necessarily that sticks out as not being a high priority to the community in this? We'll be able to see that in the final analysis, and you'll be able to make decisions with that data. But we look at sports fields, the splash pad, skate park, the events plaza, bike track, the kids playground, the dog park, and the equestrian area, all separately to discern the importance. Question 10. Any questions so far? All right.
Actually, this is Don. I do have a question. Is there information that's provided, or should there be a question asked, have you seen the plan for the new park?
I captured that in question 7 about awareness. I don't necessarily need to know that they've seen the drawing or the plan, but if they're aware and participate in the meetings, that's going to be different than somebody who's not aware, and that will give us the general idea of where people are.
Okay, that's fair.
So question 10 is what we, political ballot measure world, we call this the ballot test, right? You've learned a lot about what's going to be in the park expansion. How do you feel about it? And we can discern support or opposition to the expansion without talking about anything related to price. And this is going to be interesting because question 10 and question 11, we want to be able to see who has dropped off from support as soon as they find out what the price is. And then we can go in and figure out what that demographic is and see, what likelihood of this passing would be. So question 10, just the first time you've learned a lot about the park expansion. There's going to be some things in it. We talked about a long list of them, all 9 items. How do you feel? And then from there, how would you be willing to pay for a parcel tax for this item? And the parcel tax was a discussion I had. I know there were a lot of early on when I went to meet with the members of the board. We discussed a lot of different mechanisms. There was potential grant funds and other things. And this is what my understanding is, as most recently where we are in terms of the potential cost in terms of parcel tax. So this is why we're testing it this way. Expansion cost voters $95 per parcel per year, or $7.91 a month. Is it going to cost exactly that? I'm not 100% sure. These are kind of round numbers, but it gives us a idea of order of magnitude as to, based on what we know it will cost to do the punch list of things that you've talked about. We can discern where people are. Again, the real ballot test, vote yes, vote no, based on that amount of money. One thing I'd caveat here is if there are additional numbers that we want to test, this would be the place where we start talking about this. But based on the information I have and the way we charted forward, this would be the appropriate way to test that information. Okay. Question 12. This is where we introduce the idea of the indoor community pool. Again, we don't talk about money. We just talk about the pool, and we talk about whether or not adding the pool makes somebody more or less likely to support the expansion. And most people that would say yes, they want to support this, they don't know how much it's going to cost at this point. This is, again, trying to discern the difference between enthusiasm and enthusiasm with a dollar amount attached, right? Question 13, add that dollar amount. So adding to the pool project would require additional partial tax of $40 per year, $3.33 per month more than the park expansion alone. Then we talk about the total, $135 per parcel, or $11.25 per month. And then asking what we call the second ballot test of this situation, where we determine how people feel about spending the extra money for the pool in combination with the park expansion. Now, what we do beyond that in question 14 is kind of where we sum it all up, and we determine which category a voter falls into. They pay $135 a year for everything, $95 a year for just the park, or not willing to pay anything new or undecided. And that will give us the 4 buckets of folks that will tell us where folks might be in terms of their understanding of what goes into the project, what they're willing to pay for. Beyond that, we go straight into demographics, which gives us a lot of information about who's in the community. We have age, gender, whether or not a household has children, home ownership and renting, because voters aren't necessarily all owners, and renters do vote, and that makes a difference when you're talking about parcel taxes. And so, there is going to be a little bit of a disconnect, that it always is when you talk about a parcel tax, and you don't have, you're not surveying just people that pay those parcel taxes. So there's a little disconnect there, but that's something you have to deal with at the ballot box. So it's something you want to make sure is also reflected in the survey, and this survey will reflect that. Understanding which part of the district folks live in, how long they've lived in the community. One thing I heard from the interviews is new people in the community. There's been a lot of people moving from one part of the world to the other in the last 2 years over COVID. And so there's a discussion of, how do the new people fare versus other folks. This also kind of looks at how it might be different than previous ballot measures and items that were looked at either on this issue or other issues in the past. And then we talk about income, and those are the demographics we're going to look at. I will tell you in terms of where we are with questions, I believe that here on question 14. If we had anything else we'd want to test, we do have room to do that. We're at the point now where, adding 2 or 3 questions doesn't necessarily change the cost, because the cost is based on the number of responses and the acquisition of those responses. And a survey at this length, adding 2 to 3 questions doesn't necessarily cause a huge drop off in number of respondents, where let's say if we went to 40 questions and doubled it in length, we would have a lot harder time getting respondents. So that's, we do have a little bit more room if there's anything else somebody feels strongly about wanting to test. But in terms of answering the original question, whether or not the community is in support of and is willing to pay for this park expansion project and the additional pool, this would answer those questions, in my opinion.
All right, thank you so much. Does anyone have any additional questions?
I have one, please.
Kathy?
Thank you. I know you had mentioned before, and I don't recall, the 400. We're planning on reaching 400. You mentioned again earlier. How is that?
Yes. It's going to be split between live telephone surveys and text messages, depending on how the voters have registered and what information they've given us or given the county. When you register to vote, you put down your phone number, and those numbers are part of the database. And when you're doing voter research, you have the ability to use that data set to determine that. And then we go and determine with an algorithm that looks at past voter history, how many, it's not just every voter in the file gets a call. It's voters that are considered likely to show up in the November 2022 election. It means they vote in what we call off year or off presidential cycles, but they're not necessarily your tried and true consistent voters. They vote in the, whenever the CSD is on the ballot, for example, every 2 years for the director positions. You can't necessarily discern whether or not they vote for CSD and local issues, unfortunately. But you know if they're likely to show up. So if they show up in a governor's race, they're most likely to show up in a presidential race than the governor's race, those November elections. And we have a model that bases off of that and includes a way to capture who those voters are, and then we reach out to them through the telephone and text methods to aggregate the data.
And really, only 400, though.
Yeah, it gives us that will give us a margin of error of just under 5%.
Okay.
Deborah, any questions?
No, he's answered all the ones I
Okay.
have.
Mark, you said you had a question?
Yeah, I have a couple. Questions 1 and 2. I'm not sure how these categories relate because, gosh, what if basically nobody chooses any of the CSD issues? What if they choose crime and homelessness? I mean, or the illegal, and nothing to do with the CSD? Then that's the end of this.
Yeah.
Everything? Is that what you're saying? Trying to get here?
Not necessarily. I mean, I do think that. I mean, there's a couple reasons you'd ask the question the way you ask, and there are 2 ways to do it. One way would be just to put CSD issues down. I think we address those in terms of the services that you offer, the water parks and waste collection piece, rather than everything else. I mean, I think it's because you're going out in the field and feeling out how people feel about their community. You want to give them the opportunity to answer what they think is important. It may also be, I think, valuable. If you find that 2% of your respondents think that Parks and Recreation is most important, that may determine whether or not this is, where the energy of the district should go. I know that, obviously crime is not necessarily in your charge, or homelessness. Might be time to have a conversation with the county supervisor or, state and federal electeds. But, reality is, the first question on most surveys we call a warm-up anyway, because it gets people the idea of answering questions, makes them feel comfortable. But I like to ask about the issues because it gets people thinking about what's going on in their community before we focus them in on a specific issue. So it's a little bit of warming up the crowd, like a comedian, before, or a band would do before the main act. But it's also just good to see where the pulse of the community is in general.
Okay. And then this is just on questions 4 and 5. If you don't put something in there like a blank or something, people won't know where to put the numbers.
So, and I will say that when I write the survey versus when it gets programmed, it's a much different,
Okay.
this is not this
This
Word
is not the
document is not
form.
what this
Okay.
is what I show you.
Okay.
There is a
Well-
programming method for the telephone because it has to go to something that a call service agent may have a little radio button where they can click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or once I add it, the clarification that, do not have service in the district is the 6th answer for number
so
5.
none of them will be a hard copy survey? Okay.
No.
thought there
We're
would be
collecting
some.
the data and then it goes into a computer
Okay.
that runs the analysis and spits us back out the response.
All right. And then I just had one suggestion was questions 10 and 11. I don't know, I think I would separate 10 and 11 by one more question just to well, I guess, I mean, it's, if they give an honest answer on the number 10, then hopefully they'll
Give one on the
not change it.
on 11, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
And
that's
that's
fine.
the trick, right? As you ask question 10, you're going to see how people feel without knowing how much it costs. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Or no, I really don't like that idea. And then they're going to say, oh, I have to pay for this? And then the question
their
becomes
mind
whether they're
on
willing to or not.
All right.
In fact, that movement, those change in answers is actually very valuable data as you're making discernment going forward.
Yeah, I could see if you can get honest answers, it would be a good comparison. That was it.
All right. Charlie?
Yeah. Mr. Collier, forgive me, but it's been a while since we talked. And could you just answer 2 questions? How long have you been doing surveys like this?
About almost 15 years.
Okay, great. And how many were successful?
So
How many-
that's a tricky question.
Let me rephrase that. Of those that went to actual vote, how many were successful?
So it's a tricky way to answer, and I can give you a couple different data points. But I apologize, I have a 6-month-old in the background who's starting to get a little active. What we do with surveys varies depending on the client. In some situations, we'll do surveys for ballot measures. We'll move forward on the ballot measure. The ballot measure will be successful. I did a countywide measure in Ventura County in 2020 where there are 926,000 people and almost 500,000 voters. And we've done polling work pre-ballot measure in other communities in San Bernardino County. I did some polling that didn't necessarily answer the question of do you support this or not, but which messages are going to affect you the most. So the survey instruments vary a lot. My approach to all of this is about the strategy. What question are you trying to answer? And in this case, I can name 2 that I've lost, and I can name at least 7 or 8 that I've won, just particularly ballot measures doing these kind of survey projects. But a lot of our survey work, I'm in the field right now in a mountain community not far from you, but not your area, where we're talking about vacation rentals. And all I can say about that is, we don't care if someone votes yes or no, but we really care about what issues are most important, and how we ask those questions is totally different. So it's really just a survey design thing. So it's not really a win-loss record. When I'm not doing polling, my firm runs political campaigns, and I've got over a 70% win rate.
No, that's fine. That's very informative. Thank you very much. How did you arrive at the sample size of 400?
In terms of the population size, I would go a little bit larger. I don't like to get too big because there's no reason to oversample anything specifically. Typically, for the type of information that we would need to make the decision and the margin of error that comes with it, the marginal cost of going above 400, it's where you start getting expensive in terms of, you can naturally get a certain percentage of the population to respond. And that is cheaper than having to hit the same, universe of folks 3, 4, 5 times with a request to take a survey. You start getting diminishing returns. It gets a little bit more expensive to get those last results, and your margin of error doesn't change more than 0.1%. So, you're not improving the survey in your particular size of area more by going and getting a 500 or 600 sample. On the flip side, there are other cases where you do that. I've done a survey we're doing in Ventura County right now on a water issue that's not, going to a ballot, but we are oversampling one of the cities so we can get 300 in that city and then 200 countywide for 500 total because we want the data to reflect something differently.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, that's because I had a statistics class 100 years ago.
Yeah,
That's
it seems to me that in this position, in this type, it's more that you get a wide area versus the number of, so you get, cover the district from, because it's pretty big district, so people are going to have different views, I think, in Pinion Hills versus East Phelan. Anyways, sorry.
Well, no, that's Mr. Roberts, that's valid. And we all know that the demographics are different between the two communities. And so that could have an impact. I was in a conversation and I was led to believe that there was a test survey that was conducted. No? This is it?
Not by us.
Okay. Well, that leads to well, let me ask the other two questions. The other question. How long, when you're doing this telephonic survey, how long do you think that people are going to be on the telephone?
It varies depending on how long it takes to answer the questions, but a 20-minute or 20-question survey, I don't know. It's probably 14 to 18 minutes.
Okay. Well, let me express my concern, and maybe you can address this. The board we haven't actually taken a formal vote on this thing, but there's been pretty much a consensus all along that we want to do something about this park and building out this park expansion. We spent a lot of money on consultants and stakeholder meetings, and several of them, and community surveys and everything else. Now those surveys were not like this survey. They were, y'all come surveys. So my concern is, and I say this for you and for the board, if the survey comes back and says, and the community says, no way, we don't want to spend money to do this assessment, my concern is that puts the district at a disadvantage in the sense that if we want to go ahead and build the park anyway, which is kind of that's why we're here, that we would be opening ourselves up to criticism from the community and said, well, we said we didn't want you to do it, and you did it anyway. So I don't know if you have any comment about that, but that's my concern.
I think that's absolutely a valid concern, and I think, I think you're going to face that. I mean, this is not necessarily me as a pollster, but me as someone who's worked in public policy a very long time. That's the hard job on the dais is, if you have the data and you do it because it's the right thing to do, it's in the face of the data, that's one decision to make. If you don't have the data and you make the decision because you feel it's the right thing to do, but that's another decision. It's not necessarily. All the data is going to show is how the community feels. So if you move ahead and you didn't have the data, you guys don't want to do the survey. That's understandable. But if you didn't have the data and you went forward and people didn't like it, all the survey is going to give you an advance notice of is how people feel about it going into it. And not necessarily that. The interesting thing about this survey and the way we set it up is it specifically related to a parcel tax. So I can't speak to other funding mechanisms or whatever you might be exploring, but at this point, I think that the question to answer is, should the district put a parcel tax on the ballot to fund the expansion of the park and or the pool?
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Collier. So what is our process now?
So real quickly, Cheryl Roden, did you have any questions?
Thank you for reminding me, Ms. Ward. Cheryl?
Yeah, thank you. Let me turn my light on here. I always have bad lighting. I don't know if you want to shape your introduction at the beginning of the poll to reflect that you're doing this on behalf of the CSD. Also, in question 1, you might precede that with an unprompted question. Ask the same thing. What is the most pressing issue in the community, but unprompted, so that you're hearing from them. And I'm going to bet it's dirt roads and lost dogs. Going down to questions 4 and 5, I agree with the need to be able to identify whether or not the respondents are CSD customers or Sheep Creek customers, particularly for question 5. That will be valuable later on. We also have a few hundred people that either have wells or purchase their water. So I don't know if you want to have an other there. Also, related to the solid waste question there, you have somewhere north of 3,000 households that do not have trash service. So you might want to, as you did with the Sheep Creek and other point, identify those that are not currently utilizing CR&R or and are using the dump. That's a place where you could also do a test question on people's attitudes about recycling, because you have that issue coming up. It lends itself to other issues you're dealing with. On item 8, question 8, I would add social media to one of those, well, just to the list you have, or substitute, because that's going to be a large place where people have information about the park in this community. Going down to questions 11 and 12, I suggest you consider switching them so that you have the question about their attitudes or enthusiasms about the park with the various components of it first, their attitudes about the pool before they hear about the money, and then ask the questions about the cost, the parcel cost. That's a suggestion. In your cost tabs, when you report the poll, it would be useful, I think, for the board to have it broken down by precinct. If you can do that, I think you probably can, so that you can have a sense of attitudes about the park from residents that are much further away from where it is, or those that live immediately around it. And I think if I heard you correct, Mr. Collier, and please correct me, you said that you don't think you can obtain a list of voters to draw from that voted in the CSD election. It's my understanding you can get that from the county registrar of voters, just request it, which would be more valuable because the drop-off is significant from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot. So if you can obtain that, that would give you a much stronger indication of those residents that are voting in our local elections versus just in the presidential or the gubernatorial election in 2018. I sent along a series of questions related to what we discussed in yesterday's legislative committee meeting. They weren't questions, it was information on demographics. So Kim has that, which you'll probably want to take a look at when you consider whether or not you're going to proceed with the bond measure itself. And those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Roden. All right, so Mr. Bartz, how do we proceed now?
I think at this point, we're just looking at a consensus of the board with the list of questions that we have and the format that he's presented. I think they've done a very good job. Sounds like they've hit most of the issues that the board has brought, and probably even addressed some of the questions that Ms. Roden had too. I think we're ready to roll if the board likes the format and the questions.
Yeah, and just if I can add, if this does get to go out over this weekend, the benefit of it is we have a parks financing workshop next Wednesday. And so he did state that we would have the main data, which I think would really inform that discussion as to whether or not this is even an option to consider for funding the park.
Correct. So can I get a consensus from the board?
I have another question.
Charlie, question?
Maybe Ms. Roberts want to go first.
Well, I had mentioned 10 and 11, and I actually agree that maybe 11 and 12 should be switched, so you get the opinions before you get the cost. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's fine.
So, Mr. Collier, they're saying to switch positions for question number 11 and 12, and then that way we get, are you for the park expansion? Are you for the pool? And then hit them with the amount of money that it would cost.
Yeah, and I will add that I may want to reword a little bit around question 12 to better explain what's going on. So prior to question 11 being asked after question 12, but I think that's totally doable. I think adding social media on question 8, I'll take that. That's fine. I limited it to the channels that were, that my understanding is that were used for the original outreach of the park. But it would make sense that if someone picked up something and they decided to post it on social media, that may be another channel and probably worth asking. And if it's okay, from just addressing a few of the comments by Ms. Roden, in terms of doing by precinct, my fear is that the numbers in each precinct are going to be smaller than we would want to have data collection for. So it actually skew the results to look at it that way. It's not going to be in that normalized distribution that you'd hope for. So while yes, you can absolutely generate that data by precinct, you'll find that some precincts are going to have more than other and still meet the rest of the demographic requirements. Otherwise, it would drive the cost of the survey up significantly to go and make sure that that was normalized by precinct to get geographic distribution, when instead you're looking more for age and other demographics that would still satisfy the need to get in that margin of error. And lastly, on the voters, while I can obtain the list from the county, it doesn't actually determine. It will, if I ask who voted in the CSD election, our election, and just remind me because I'm not an expert on your particular elections, I'm assuming they're on the November ballot with everything else. And if that's the case, what's called the undervote between people who vote for, say, governor and people who vote for on CSD issues, there's no way to discern without knowing who voted for what. There is an undervote. You know what the undervote is by precinct, but it's like knowing if you voted for candidate A or candidate B. That information is not something they track and not a way I can shape the data, unfortunately. Wish I could.
Okay. Charlie?
I'm going to ask for advice on this one because I apologize. I should have thought of this earlier. But I'm actually concerned, Mr. Kennedy, about the way this is agendized. Because it doesn't say that this is an action item. It's a presentation only.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, this is a presentation of what the board has discussed about the survey. And I believe that the proper way to do this is not a vote, but looking for consensus of the board for sending out these questions would be appropriate.
Yeah, we're looking at consensus for the questions. This is definitely well under the general manager's purchasing authority.
It's not the issue.
Yeah, so.
It's not the issue at all.
Mr. Kennedy, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I certainly there isn't any action to be taken by the board on this. It's simply a review, and then if there's any consensus, then that would be fine. But I would not recommend that the board entertain a motion or take any formal action at all.
Okay, so how would you like to proceed?
thumbs the word.
With the changes that Ms. Roden and some of the board members have directed Mr. Collier to change, I think that it sounds fine the way it is. So my consensus is to go forward with the questions.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Charlie? Okay? Mark?
Can we do that? Are we
said we
running
needed-
into a conflict?
He said we needed a consensus. We're all saying yes,
Did
no.
Mr. Kennedy say that I'm not sure.
He said what he
Mr.
said was we can't make a motion on it because
Right.
it's not an actionable
Okay,
item.
we can agree with the question
Correct.
Yes.
format.
That would be
Yes.
Good to go.
Yeah, there isn't any action that's being taken.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right.
I just wanted to get that clarified, Mr. Kennedy.
Sure.
I'm going to, as far as whether I agree with this proposal or not, I'm going to let my comments earlier stand that my concerns are that we could be asking for difficulty if we get a negative response in the community. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
So then I guess we're okay to move forward.
We're okay to move
For
forward
the
then.
staff to do whatever they need to do.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Collier. We appreciate all your hard work on this.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we are moving on to 6A, discussion and possible adoption of ordinance number 2022-01, establishing guidelines for the conduct of district public meetings and activities. Mr. Bartz.
Thank you. From time to time, the district's sunshine ordinance is reviewed to determine if any revisions are necessary. The last review of the district's policy took place on January 5th, 2022, where modifications concerning remote meetings were suggested. Ordinance 2022-01 is attached for the board's review, which has the suggested modifications concerning remote meetings incorporated as prepared by Steve Kennedy, the district's legal counsel. And the recommendation is for the board to adopt ordinance 2022-01, establishing guidelines for conduct of district public meetings and activities.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? Kathy?
No, I'm sorry. No.
No, it's okay. Deborah? No. Mark? No. Charlie?
Yes.
I had a brief conversation with Ms. Ward earlier because I was looking at the background statement on page 47. The second paragraph says, concerning the ordinance number 2022-01 is attached for the board review, which is suggested modifications concerning the remote meetings. And I now know the answer, but just for clarification for the board, I asked where is the reference to these electronic meetings, and Ms. Ford's response was on page 49, section 2.1. It relates to, it says there's a word there called and/or by teleconference, and I'm assuming that Mr. Kennedy that Zoom counts as a teleconference.
Correct. So if the board would like, I can go through where the changes were made to your existing sunshine ordinance to accommodate AB 361. So with respect to your sunshine ordinance, what the board has done is, as the board is aware, you're subject to the requirements of the Brown Act when it relates to the manner in which you conduct your board meetings. The board has historically gone above and beyond what the statutory requirements are for the Brown Act, and in the name of transparency, adopted your own sunshine ordinance, which reflects an absolute commitment to conducting your meetings in a way that allows the public as much input and involvement into the manner in which decisions are made, both at committee level and at the board level. Over the last year, as a result of the pandemic, AB 361 was approved by the legislature and signed into law by the governor effective October 1, which allows the board to conduct meetings in a way that would allow for teleconferencing, which is a technical word under the Brown Act, which includes both remote meetings, audio and video. And so what we've done here is we've tried to incorporate the language of AB 361 and what that has done to the statutory requirements under the Brown Act, and how the board, and how do we integrate that into the sunshine ordinance. The first change we made was in 2.1. And in 2.1, it has the physical location of your board meeting, but also a reference in the third line about teleconference in accordance with the requirements of the Brown Act. So that we've incorporated into that the AB 361 resolutions that the board has adopted since September 30 of 2021, which allows for the board to conduct your meetings through teleconference. So your meetings are not just in person, but they can be conducted remotely, either through the public or with or board members can participate remotely as well. 2.2, we've added language there that indicates that the special meetings will not only be conducted in accordance with Government Code Section 54956, but also other applicable provisions of the Brown Act, which includes AB 361. In 2.4, we have language indicating that the district will provide 5 copies of the agenda packet at the board location because you may be meeting telephonically or remotely, and so that there may not be in-person access by the public at the physical location of the board meeting. We've added language in there that says the district will post the full agenda packet for all of the meetings on the district website. And those were the changes that were made as a result of the review of the Sunshine Ordinance. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. What we tried to do was essentially integrate what the board has done with your AB 361 resolution and what the board has done with the recertification every 30 days, so that it is consistent with what the board has adopted through your Sunshine Ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Did that answer your question, Charlie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
All right, before we go to motion, did anyone in the public have any questions on 6A? All right, so can I get a motion?
Approval of the item.
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor of the motion to approve ordinance 2022-01? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to 6B, discussion and possible adoption of First Amendment to the exclusive franchise agreement between the Phelan Pinion Hills Community Service District and CR&R Incorporated for the solid waste handling and recycling services. Mr. Bartz.
Thank you. This one is going to be a team effort. Ms. Ward is going to tee this up, and Brent Spears is also here, and Steve Kennedy, of course, to back clean up on this, to discuss this item. And the recommendation, staff recommendation tonight is going to be review instead of adopt. There's going to be some changes discussed tonight. So we'll just start off with that. So it's not going, we're not asking for a vote on this, but just a review. Ms. Ward?
All right. Thank you. Okay, the district's current franchise agreement with CR&R was adopted in July of 2019, and since that time, final rulemaking for SB 1383 was completed, and certain regulations went into effect on January 1, 2022. District staff has prepared a timeline for implementation as guidance for SB 1383 implementation, and one of the initial steps in this process is to amend the district's franchise agreement to include service provisions related to SB 1383. So just a reminder, that's the organics law, the organics recycling rules and regs. In order to begin the process to prepare for uniform collection, CR&R will incur significant capital expenses to add personnel, purchase vehicles and bins and carts, and to help the district educate customers on upcoming requirements. Before CR&R outlays the capital, they have requested for the franchise agreement to be amended to demonstrate the intent of the district to implement uniform residential collection, which is currently proposed to begin July 1, 2023. Additionally, we will be, according to our timeline, implementing commercial 3-cart system, so 3 levels of service, July 1 of this year. And so it does provision for that as well. So in the packet, we have the amendment. So this is the first amendment to our exclusive franchise agreement between us and CR&R. I also included a copy of the franchise agreement for reference. And then at the very end, you'll see the updated uniform collection timeline. So it was a very lengthy document, and I am happy to answer any questions. Mr. Spears is here, and Mr. Kennedy has also reviewed the amendment.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. I know at the end of our solid waste committee meeting, Mr. Spears had some additional changes that he wanted to make. Are those included in this new draft?
Yes, so the first round of changes sent by CR&R are included in here, and then that was sent back for additional review and comments, which I received Monday. Of course, I wasn't here. And so we went through them Tuesday, and we just have some outstanding questions to work through with them before we incorporate the next round of changes from CR&R.
Okay, thank you.
There's several. So they'll come back in a red line format so you can see what's changed between this version and next time we see it.
Okay. Did anyone else have any questions?
No.
Mark, go ahead.
Page 67, the explanations of what goes into what, to me, was very confusing. I don't know if there's a way to clarify it, but you've got 50 pounds of waste, 100 and another 100 pounds of waste, for instance, on the SSGCOW, the green container. It didn't make much sense to me. So I don't know if that's in the statutory language, but 50 pounds of, I mean, nobody's gonna, I mean, I don't understand that. 50 pounds of branches, but then you can throw another 100 pounds of other same stuff in? I don't understand.
I'll let Mr. Spears answer that. I will point out that a lot of the language does come directly from the state and from the regulations, specifically the definitions as well. But Brent, are you on with us still?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Really did not hear Mark's question regarding the SSG COW collection. Were you concerned about the weight and that it seems excessive, or what was it? I'm sorry.
No, and I don't know if this is on. It's the definitions that are down there. You've got tree trimmings of no more than 50 pounds, but then you've got another 100 pounds of, I'm assuming, tree trimmings, right?
Yes, tree trimmings.
So, I mean, it didn't make sense to me that.
This language is basically from Cal Recycle. So we really just pulled this same language in from Cal Recycle. It's a language that they're using. If you have a issue with it, I'm sure we could scratch out or simplify it.
I don't know if there's a way to make it a little more explanatory. I don't know.
Yeah.
Also like for in number B, paper products, printing and writing papers, does that include like containers you get for fast food and all that stuff?
No, that would be separate.
Okay, where does that fall into recycling?
That most of the scrap that is food waste, as you can see.
Not food waste, but the containers that things come in.
Food soil, that's in C, food soil paper.
C, food soil paper, where's that?
Food scraps, food soil paper, yard cleanings, that's all going in there.
The second line of that paragraph.
But isn't some of this going to be a little bit more defined?
This is going
possibly?
to
I
be
know it's from-
distilled for public consumption when we do the outreach. So they're going to
I
get
guess that's
a
the issue, right?
user-friendly version
Right.
when
where
we
it's a little more
do
defined.
the outreach. Yeah, they're not going to get several paragraphs with state
yes.
legal language. They're going
Everybody
to
will
get,
understand.
I guess that's what I
yeah.
was,
They'll receive pictures and,
Yeah,
specifically like the green bin, you get to put in cardboard pizza boxes.
Right.
Right? But not, styrofoam packaging.
Yes.
Each
yeah,
can-
like you said, there'll be
Yeah.
pictures, there'll be, yeah. okay.
Yeah.
I think we'll get it.
Because that was what I just really couldn't, if there's a
Yeah.
better explanation than this, then that would be helpful.
Yeah, as,
In the desert.
yeah,
Yeah, the intent
However-
of this is to be comprehensive with the state requirements. And then the reality of what we'll send to the customers is going to be, it's going to be this, but in user-friendly form.
Right.
And then the last thing I had was costs. Is are these charts, these numbers at the end, is that what it is now, or would it, I mean, you don't have the costs for
Yeah.
what it's going to be?
The rate schedule that is attached to the franchise agreement, that was adopted in 2019.
Right.
We did that with a 218 process, so the methodology for the rate schedule is still good. It does go up by CPI annually, and so the current rates are not this. This is just what was in the adopted document.
Okay, but I mean, so you don't have at this point what the projected rates, any changes will be yet?
Correct.
You don't have that, because it's obviously not going to be,
Oh, no,
Even-
because
Right.
the service
Because you're
level's
splitting
changing.
it all up, yeah.
Yeah, so what, the next task we have with CRNR, one of many, if you look on the timeline for implementation, if I can find it. It talks about, one second.
board reviews rates, that's April
Yeah, so
2022?
we're going to be working on the commercial rate structure pretty quickly here, because that is going, the 3 levels of service, so your recycle bin, your regular bin, and your organics bin, the commercial customers will be receiving that July 1 of this year, and so now we need to work on the costs for that service and go through that whole process and adopt those rates, which we adopt by a resolution after public hearing and all of that. And then we'll work on the residential rates similarly, but in the early part of next year.
And my last question would be, have you developed a plan to roll this out, or is that in the works to the public?
Yeah, so fortunately, this year is commercial rollout, and for the past 2 years, CR and our staff and district staff have been educating the business customers, so our commercial customers and schools, on what is coming. So we've let them know that, hey, soon you're going to have to start scraping food waste off of things into a separate bin, and much more things can go into the green bin and all of that. And so they are very aware that this is coming. We just haven't had, we haven't, first of all, had the ordinance requiring this service, and we don't have the rates. And of course, CR&R is ramping up to get that third bin to them, or cart, depending, and trucks and manpower and all of that. So it's a lot.
No, I know, that's why I asked, because it's
Yeah, and
going to
that,
be a lot of, I remember what it took just to do the
commercial.
commercial,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, and so the whole point of this amendment is to assure CR&R that we are implementing this service so they can begin this process now and getting everything that they need to gear up for that July 1 start date.
Which is also, I assume, statutory?
So technically, January 1 of this year, we need to be doing this. We are applying for, it's not a waiver, but we are going to be, in the actually next meeting, bringing a resolution with an intent to comply with SB 1383 along with our timeline and what we've done so far and what we will be doing in order to make sure that we will be in compliance soon and avoid penalties. They're mindful at the state level, which is why they've allowed the resolution of intent to comply, that COVID has thrown a giant monkey wrench in this, because every single jurisdiction is having to comply, and every single jurisdiction is having the same supply chain issues with getting vehicles, parts for vehicles, employees, bins. I mean, it's just, everybody needs it, and
Right,
they're not available, so.
yeah. And that was the SB 619 that he brought up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Charlie, did you have any other questions?
So, I guess, so we're going to have two Proposition 218 processes, one for commercial, one for residential.
Yeah, it'll allow time for developing the residential rates unless we believe we can come up with something that's forecasting for next year.
And who's doing the rate computation, CR&R?
Yeah, so historically, they are part, Brent, correct me if I'm wrong, he works with an association of haulers where they come together with the methodology for determining residential and commercial rates, and that's what we historically based solid waste rates on. And so I don't know if it's going to change. That's definitely going to be part of the board discussion on how the rates are developed and everything. It may be that we need a consultant to help draft the rates. I don't know.
Is it under PUC, the rates? No.
No,
No.
Proposition 218.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're going to have, we're going to have 218 hearing on commercial in June of '22 and residential in June of '23.
Yes, unless we
and
need
that's fine.
to change that.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure, I mean, we just will have Proposition 218 processes. Okay, that's really all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, any members of the public have any comments on 6B before we move on? Questions?
Yes, just a short one. As you're looking at the rates, it's not relative to anything tonight, but as you're looking at the rates, and because we have, several thousand households that do not currently have cart pickup, I'm hoping that you can look at the possibility and feasibility of some low-income rates for those residents for whom the fees would be a hardship. So I'm just bringing that up to you to consider going forward. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on to 6C, discussion and possible action regarding the district's.
So for clarification, should it come back next meeting?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we need to iron out a few things with CR&R, and
Okay.
we'll bring back,
So that'll be at the end. We'll talk about that at the end on the agenda for
Yes.
next meeting. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bartz.
Thank you. This resolution is for the district's purchasing policy. It's reviewed periodically to make changes as needed. The last changes, or the last review was June 17th of 2020, where the section regarding purchase of vehicles was modified. At the January 5th board meeting, this policy was requested to be brought back for review. I believe Director Johnson had some questions or specific questions or comments on areas of this, but it's open to the entire board for questions and answers.
All right. Questions. Let's start with Charlie this time.
Well, the reason, and I think I said something at the last meeting in director's comments, the reason I asked this to be put on the agenda was because our current policy is silent as to change orders. And so this meeting and the last meeting, we had contractor invoices that were being approved by the board that both of them, in both instances, they had change orders. And so just for completeness, I guess, you can come up with all kinds of scenarios. What if the board doesn't need to approve a contractor's agreement because it's under 25,000, for example? And it turns out that during the course of the events, they want to do a change order that takes it over 25,000, then the board didn't have a chance to review that. That's scenario one. And then, of course, the current one in this package in item 3, there are 2 change orders to 1 contract. Now they're both under $10,000, but I mean, you could think of scenarios where some of those things, either the change order could be over 25,000 or it takes the contract into another realm of cost. And like on the one in the current package, it says, there's a line there, it says approved by the general manager. That's not signed.
Right.
number one. Number two, it says approved by the board. Well, when we approve the consent item, we approve it. But I would like the policy to be more clear in terms of how we handle these change orders in the case that we have these somewhat extraordinary situations where we kind of get around the existing policy. So I just wanted to have the board have that open discussion and maybe give recommendations to staff, Mr. Kennedy, about, he may have some ideas about how to adapt the language so that we make sure that we take care and address some of the board concerns.
Yep. If I could, in anticipation of that, I'd already kind of thought through some of these things. I'd like to kind of discuss how we've dealt with the purchasing policy in the past regarding these issues, and also looking forward to, is there something we could do to improve this? I'm going to go back to scenario number one. Purchasing policy allows the manager to go up to $25,000. If I issue a purchase order for $24,999 and we have a change order that comes in on that purchase that we're doing for $15, we would bring that item back to the board for approval, because it's pretty cut and dried and clear. It exceeded the $25,000. That would go to the board for approval as an agenda item. Now, for scenario number two, which we talked about tonight, and I'll just go generically, I'm not going to address a specific one, but I will reference the park project. If we have a grading contractor or grading engineer that's doing the design on that, and it comes in at $5,000 more than what was approved in the amount, looking at that, it's within the manager's spending authority, so we've approved that to go ahead and do that work, but then brought it back to the board in the approval, in the consent calendar, to where it could be pulled and discussed if there were any questions on that. So if there's suggestions for a better way of doing it, we would be open to that. But one of the things that we try to do with our policies here, and the purchasing policy in particular, we've had a lot of discussion over the years, would be if you try to address every potential scenario, we're going to have a purchasing policy that exceeds the number of pages that it does now. But again, we are open to whatever the board would like to do with that. But we think that we've handled it in a pretty reasonable manner to address these changes. Obviously, if it were a change order, a substantial change order, or one that exceeded the $25,000, that would definitely be brought back to the board. But again, the gray areas that we have are what we perceive as gray areas. We think we've handled it correctly, but again, we're open to different ideas on how to deal with that.
Yeah, if I may, I completely agree with General Manager Bartz on that, especially the first part where if you have a project that is within the general manager's spending authority, and then a change order comes in and puts that project over the general manager's spending authority, that does need to come back to the board. And if you look at section 4203.17, it does talk about splitting purchases, and it says means the intentional separation of a district project into smaller portions in order to avoid any of the purchasing limits established by this policy, and splitting purchases is specifically prohibited under the policy. And that's an important provision in that you will see that, and I think Director Johnson is right on point with identifying this as a hotspot where you can get, and it applies really in any context, in which the general manager approves a contract or the board approves a contract without going into competitive bidding, or even when the board approves a contract after competitive bidding and then gets hit with a number of different change orders. Change orders is a big deal, and is something that needs to be looked at to make sure that it isn't a way to avoid the splitting purchases issue. So I think the way that General Manager Bartz mentioned this is that if you get a change order, it's considered as part of the larger project. So if it puts that larger project into a different category, then it needs to be treated as that. And I think that's the way I think staff has interpreted it. And I agree with that construction of that provision.
Okay. Any other questions? Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Well,
Charlie.
I had just always thought that what you had described, Mr. Kennedy, was part of it. If it was a $20,000 contract and they wanted 7,000 more, that put it over the limit.
Right.
But if there was a higher one approved by the board, say for $100,000, I'm just getting numbers, and that a change order was requested that exceeded 25,000, that didn't need to have a percent of the total, but then that would have to be brought back to the board. But if it was, say, if it was a $300,000 contract and they were requested, 18,000 or something, then that could be approved by the general manager. Am I wrong to assume that?
If it was 18,000, I think
Well,
then,
his limit is 25,000, but if it was a 300 or 400,000 or a $800,000 contract and a change order came in above his spending limit, then that would be brought back to the board. But if it was less than that, he would have the option.
yes. So if the original project went to the board, and the board approved it, so the board has already gone through the approval process, then I think that triggers the general manager authority as to what he can sign as far as change orders beyond that. I think the question is, what happens if go to competitive bidding? And this is actually probably the more common situation, is you do competitively bid it, and the low bidder wins. And sometimes what will happen is the low bidder will win by a lot, and then realize, okay, so we didn't do a very good job of what we did on the bidding process, and so now we're going to recover what our actual costs are. We got the contracts, and now we're going to recover our actual costs by hitting staff with a ton of change orders. And that's really where you get into, all right, we need to, if we're going to award a contract to the low bid, and then how do we deal with change orders that go crazy on us? And so I think that's something to really keep an eye on, more than a situation where you've got a project that is under the general manager's spending authority, then a change order pushes it above. Because I think the staff has treated it as, okay, now I have to go to the board of this, because now the overall cost of the project is one that requires board approval. And I think it's important to recognize the levels that the board has established, not only the statutory ones for the purchase of construction supplies and for construction projects, but also the discretionary ones under 4207 of the policy, which is not statutory. And so the board has set forth those limits, but those need to be recognized by staff as applying even on projects that have already been approved by the board. And so I think that those need to be recognized. Okay, so what's the general manager's authority beyond that, even if it's been approved by the board previously?
You mean like a dollar amount?
Correct. So if you look at section 4210, there are on page 141 of the policy or the materials. Then you see where the general manager's authority is for purchases not to exceed 5,000, 5 to 15,000, 15 to 25,000, and so on. And if it goes beyond that, after the board has already approved it, if then you get a change order that is above 25,000, then that needs to come to the board. If it hasn't gone to the board and the general manager has approved it, but a change order pushes it above those limits, then that would need to come back to the board.
Okay.
And Charlie, I think this is timely as we get into the potential construction of the park project, community center. We are going to see change orders in the process. So I think it's, would be smart for the district to look very closely at the contracts and the specifications, how they're written, so we don't have these change orders, to have quality material that we put out to bid. Because this is going to be a very large project in many different disciplines that we're dealing with. So hitting this right up front, I think is timely, to say the least.
And sometimes what you'll see is the board, in approving a contract for the project, will approve it for the amount in the bid, and then give the general manager specific authority above that amount, say 10% above that amount, to deal with change orders without necessarily bringing it back to the board. So you can do that as part of the contract award on a case-by-case basis, is make that determination. Is award a contract and say, okay, you've got authority up to 10% above that amount. Anything above that needs to come back to the board.
Okay, any other questions?
Well, I feel I need to clarify what I said. I want it to be perfectly clear that I have absolutely no doubt that the general manager Bartz and his staff have done it properly and with the intent that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. That is not the question. I have implicit trust with the staff. But all the things we just said and all the things that Mr. Bartz said are not written down. And I'm not worried about the current staff. I'm worried about the staff that's here 10 years from now. And they may not be thinking about it. They wouldn't have the benefit of this experience in this conversation. So I would just be more comfortable if it was written down. What Mr. Bartz said in the way he currently handles it is absolutely proper. But I would just like to see it written down in the policy. That's my concern. It's not for now, it's for the future.
Okay, well, it does state that, the recommendation is to determine if we need to modify anything. So at this point, we can request that that be modified, correct, and then brought back again for a vote?
I'm just one of five, right? That's my recommendation, that we take a look at that and see if we can't just tighten up the language. I don't want to write another 25 pages in the policy, but I think Mr. Kennedy, although he does get paid by the word.
So in 3 words or less, in section 4210.04, you can add in there what Charlie wants, right?
Well, I defer to district council, but I've expressed my concerns. I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but if the board agrees with me, fine. If not, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, we could tighten up the language. 4204 says that implementing this policy, district employees are prohibited from splitting purchases. And what the intent there is that if a change order triggers moving the cost of the project into a different tier under your policy, then it needs to be considered globally rather than as a separate, each item separately. What we could do is we could tighten up that language to reflect that includes change orders as well. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity to tighten up the language in the manner that Director Johnson is suggesting, that reflects perhaps the intent 4204, but also provide maybe more specific guidance with respect to change orders.
And Dawn, that would work out, for you? Or would it make things more difficult, or how, in your opinion?
It would not change the way we're doing things at all, but it does put that down on paper if that's what the board would like to see.
Well, we could see it
Yeah.
and discuss it.
All right. So do we have any public questions or comments on 6C?
It needs to be redlined.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're bringing
We
it back.
recommend we refer this to staff or refer to take into consideration our comments and bring it back with the next agenda?
Yes,
Is that what we're doing?
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we pulled 6D. So moving on to 6E, update on the proposed Civic Center and Phelan Park expansion projects. Mr. Burns.
George is going to take this one.
Mr. George.
Hi. And it's been pretty slow with the county as far as the review of the plans. We haven't heard back on the grading and the other construction documents for the Civic Center. We did hear back from the CEQA consultant. We should have the draft available for review tomorrow afternoon before it gets sent out to the county. What's pending is a letter based on the AB 52, the notice to the San Manuel, I think it's San Manuel, Mission Band of Indians of a project. They're given 20 or 30 days to respond to our project before we kind of proceed with the next steps. So that's all I have now as far as any changes from our last report.
Okay. Any questions for George? No, thank you. All right, 6F, update on the status of negotiations for the consolidation of Sheep Creek Water. Mr. Bartz.
As of right now, there's not a lot of updates since the last meeting that we had. We did have a meeting a week and a half ago with the state. They brought in somebody new on discussions with the water rights, who gave a completely different answer as far as funding for the water rights that we've been dealing with for the last year or so. But there are some discussions ongoing about how to make sure that still happens with the purchase of the water rights, to where the water rights are brought over as part of the consolidation. And I believe over the next month or so, there's going to be a newspaper article putting some of the information out to the community, talking about what potentially can be funded and the benefits to the districts, and also maybe a small rate comparison. If Sheep Creek had to do the improvements on their own right now, how it would affect customers versus consolidation, what their bills would look like. So that is still a work in progress. We're gathering a lot of information still, but definitely we are pushing the state to continue on the road we're going down. I'm still optimistic that this is a viable solution for the community.
Definitely.
If I can just add, we do have a meeting with the state on Tuesday to further discuss water rights.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the
Just,
board?
Do we expect a decision within, I'm not going to say we're going to make some smart remark. Are we gonna-
It's still going to be a little bit of time for a decision. They're just considering what they're going to fund. They're still doing a little bit of work on quantifying the fire flows for the downtown area and the costs associated with that. So it's just a long process.
Well, my understanding was that the single most important issue is what do we do with the water rights, right?
That was the number one issue from day one. And
When will that be resolved?
Well, they threw a curveball at us with the meeting a week and a half ago, saying they didn't think that could be funded. So we're looking at alternatives to how that can work, or maybe it was just a comment made by one person who may or may not have the authority to make that determination.
All right, thank you.
All right, so we will move on to, any questions from the public?
Thank you. No, I don't have questions for the whole rest of the meeting.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
All right, we were moving on to number 7, committee reports, Antelope Valley adjudication,
Nothing.
engineering,
meeting is the 25th, I believe.
Yeah, end of the month.
Next week.
All right. Finance Committee?
20 years, the meeting's the
27th
27th.
for
Yeah.
the finance.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what'd you say? Did you call my name?
Finance Committee?
We have a meeting on the 25th.
Your finance is 25th?
Opposite.
Engineering is
You're on both,
27th.
so yeah, that's why you got confused.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to step on
He'll-
you, but I
he'll
wanted
be
to
there.
correct it, that's all.
All right, legislative?
Yeah, that's right.
We met yesterday and went over the poll that we're putting forward.
All right, Parks and Rec, we met on the 11th, and we just went over the events for 2022. And Waste and Recycling.
Well, we also
Yes,
changed, updated the CIP, which was
correct.
no changes.
Yes,
Waste and recycling, we went last week, or was it the week before?
last week,
Last
right?
week. And we went over briefly what we presented earlier, and it'll be brought back to the board yet again. That's it.
All right. Make sure I'm not skipping anything. Moving on to 8, Staff and General Managers Report. Mr. Bartz?
I have nothing more to report.
All right, so number 9, Directors Report. We'll start with Kathy.
I have nothing new to report.
Deborah?
Nothing new as well.
Mark?
Nothing additional.
Charlie?
Nothing.
And I have nothing to report either. Wow. All right, so we will move on to number 10, correspondence information. Ms. Ward.
Yeah, so you'll see that the budget schedule of events is in the packet. I do want to point out that once again, we did receive the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, so yay, finance staff.
Congratulations.
And then, of course, just the standards, the billing schedule and
But you got it figured out.
protecting your pipes. We're still, when it's cold at night, receiving phone calls the next morning where people's water isn't working and so just reminding them that your pipes can freeze.
'Tis the season.
Yes.
All right. Moving on to number 11 then, review of action items. Ms. Ward, were there any prior meeting action items?
Yes, and I just had them in front of me. They were attended to. The only one that's outstanding is the draft strategic plan, which I have scheduled to go on the February 2nd board meeting as an agenda item.
All right, and current meeting action items.
Just agenda items for next meeting.
Got it. All right, so then number 12, set agenda for next meeting.
Madam President, I
Yes.
ask your forgiveness. I forgot under director's comments. I wanted to ask staff if we had contemplated seeking the District of Distinction Award from CSDA. I believe we qualify.
We can look into that and start filling out the application.
Thank you.
I would also like to add a bit. I'm on the vote for the Association of San Bernardino County Community Service Districts this coming Monday.
Next one.
Yeah.
Good luck. All right, so back to number 12, agenda for next meeting.
Sorry.
Ping pong.
Yeah, so just a reminder that we are meeting again next week on Wednesday at 5 o'clock to talk about the park financing. There is a possibility I might need to turn it into a special board meeting just to adopt some resolutions authorizing grant funding. If they can be pushed out, we will wait till the regular meeting. It's TBD as of today.
Okay.
So heads up for that. The next regular meeting, of course, I just said we have the review of the draft strategic plan, and then we'll be bringing back the franchise amendment and the purchasing policy.
All right, do any members of the board have items you would like to add to the agenda?
Will we be discussing the, what happened with the grant at the workshop?
Yeah, tentatively, we have KTUA scheduled to do a presentation, kind of a wrap-up of what went right and what went wrong with the grant.
And what time is that?
So that would be at the regular meeting on February 2nd at 6 PM.
With KTUA?
Yes.
Okay, but
That is next Wednesday at 5 PM.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we have no further business before the board, we are adjourned at 7:35. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.